Hey there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love creative people. I think art and creativity make the world go around, make the tough times bearable. Where would we be without our movies and our music and our art, especially in times like these? So I like to lift up the people that do it. Today, my guest is Ron Butler, also known as Ronnie Butler. That's how I met him. He is an actor. He was a series regular on the show True Jackson VP, but he's really carved out a huge career for himself as an audiobook narrator. I would see him post about it occasionally on Facebook, and I was always like, I want to talk to him about that world because I think it's really interesting. I love audiobooks, and I started listening recently to a book that Ronnie narrated. It is called Baldwin, A Love Story. It is about the author James Baldwin, and it is told through the loves of his life. The author is Nicholas Boggs, and when I saw that Ronnie was narrating it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. James Baldwin is a hero of mine. He's somebody that I did a deep dive into researching when I was writing podcasts for Wondery, and I loved this idea of seeing his story told through the loves of his life. And I've been listening to it, and Ronnie does an amazing job. He has a Baldwin voice that he does that is so evocative. And so I reached out to him, and I wanted to talk to him not just about this project, but what it's like to be an audiobook narrator. How does it work? How do you get paid? Do you go into a studio? Do you do it at home? I've never talked to anyone that does that before, so I had a lot of questions just about how that world works. So this is a longer episode than usual because I have a lot that I want to know about that world, and I also want to talk to Ronnie specifically about his career, but he's done a lot of interesting things in that world, and we get into it. But before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that if you like this podcast and want to support it, there's some cool things you can do. You can go to my website, DennisAnyone.net, and leave a tip in my virtual tip jar. Help me cover my expenses. You can also become a subscriber to my Patreon and Substack bonus podcast. It's like a spinoff. It's called Dennis Hensley's Happy and Gay. And it's about a half hour. I do it once a week. I end with a little nugget about happiness, a topic I'm really interested in. But here's the big hook that I'm going to hook you all with on this. In a recent episode, I found some letters from Gwyneth Paltrow that she wrote me in the 90s when I interviewed her for a magazine. And we had a little friendly pen pal thing going on. And I totally forgot about them. So I read them live, like for the first time. I didn't look at them before I read them. They're not long, but they're really fun and interesting. They show a different side of her, very funny. And I kind of freak out while I'm reading them. Just this flashback of this was a thing that happened. And I made that particular episode, Letters from Gwyneth, available to anyone. So you don't have to be a subscriber, but it'll give you a taste of what it's like. And those letters are the best. I still can't believe them. I kind of freaked out reading them, and I'm still thinking about them. And there you go. So that's Patreon and Substack. Just search Dennis Hensley's Happy and Gay. You can also become a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows, queer shows, and you can get my show early and all these other great shows if you subscribe. And you can learn about that at dnrstudios.com. All right, here now is the interview with Ron Butler. Joining me now from sunny Palm Springs, California, it's Ron Butler. He's an actor as well as a narrator for audiobooks. And you've done over 400 of them, and I'm listening to one of them right now, Baldwin, A Love Story. And you're so good at this. I was like, I have to reach out to him and see if he'll do the pod. And here it is. It's happening. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. It's great to be here. And I really appreciate the fact that you reached out, because I don't know. That book was a labor of love, and it's a wonderful, beautifully written book by Nicholas Boggs, and I've gotten so much wonderful feedback from it, and right. I just appreciate you reaching out and inviting me to talk about it.
Well, a few years ago, I was writing podcast episodes for Wondery, and there was a show called Imagined Life, and the premise was that each episode would take you through the life of a famous person as though you're walking in their shoes, but you didn't know who you were until the end. So you're trying to figure out. Yeah, it was really brilliantly conceived. And I wrote a bunch of those episodes, and one of them was on James Baldwin. So I did a deep dive into him and got to know his story. And I mean, what a hero, what an icon, what a man. Right? So when I saw this new book that was focused more on his loves, I was very intrigued by it, and I've been listening to it, and you did the narration. So I was like, oh, this is a lot of my favorite stuff coming together, and I want to talk about it. So here we are. How did that come to you, that project?
The way a lot of these, what we would call front list books, meaning that books that are about to be published, that have not yet been published, right? Right. Because of the now popularity of audiobooks, most authors and publishing houses, release a book in all formats at the same time, right? The print book, the ebook, and the audiobook. And because they anticipated, I didn't realize this at the time, but they anticipated the attention that this book would get. They were pretty judicious about finding who they wanted to narrate. Right. So as has become increasingly popular in my industry, you have to audition for a book. When I first started narrating 12 years ago, I would say 95% of the books that I narrated were books that were offered to me. Right. Now I get offered maybe 40%, and 60% of the books I do, I have to submit a sample for. Right. And this is one such case. So, I was asked by Macmillan to submit a sample. There you go. So I did. And interestingly enough, and this will maybe come out a little later as we're talking, they came back to me and said, oh, we really like what you're doing. The author loves what you're doing. We'd love to hear you make this particular adjustment. And I went, okay. And I did it. And then after that, they emailed back and said, we love it. We want you to do it. Fantastic. So that's how that happened. When you're narrating this book, when James speaks, when you're saying something that he said, you do a version of him, or like you it's not the normal narration. You kind of alter it a little. How did you approach that? How did you think about that? Yeah, so it's it's really interesting in the world of audiobooks, especially when you're doing nonfiction, right? From someone who is alive or who's no longer here but is very popular in the cultural domain. There's always this real trepidation or real caution towards trying to impersonate them. You don't want to do an impersonation per se, right? But at the same time, if you don't give that text some kind of lift, some kind of treatment, sometimes the listener is left feeling deprived, Right. And in this book, where he is quoted so often in so many different ways, the challenge of this book wasn't just that he's quoted; it's that he's quoted in speaking. Yeah. In interpersonal speech, like the way we're talking now, just with friends. Right. He's quoted in letters. He's quoted in public performances and interviews and speeches, right? And in each one, as is with all of us, he has a slightly different voice. You talk to your friends differently than you would say in this interview, right. And so the challenge for me was to embody all those different voices and to embody what I felt was the essence of the way he spoke and the way he communicated in each of these, as opposed to doing an exact impersonation. So, he had a flair for speaking. He had a certain affectation when speaking publicly at different points in his life. And I tried to embody those in terms of rhythms, right, and cadence. Yeah. Now, this book focuses on his loves. And I would love to hear how you would define the focus of the book, because I've just read about it and I've been listening to it. Sure. But what sets it apart from other Baldwin biographies? Well, Nick spent about 20 years researching this book, and he started, like many others, with simply the writing of Baldwin. But the deeper he looked into it, he understood. He came to understand and see that so many people talked about Baldwin as being sort of this lonely figure, and Nick felt, and his evidence, I think, proves that, in fact, it was quite the opposite. He had several great and very passionate loves, and besides platonic loves, Buford Delaney, who was his mentor, who he loved desperately and who loved him and was probably in love with him in a way that Baldwin wasn't back. Mary Painter, who was one of his best friends and stalwart supporters throughout most of his life. Right. But then you have, the men, the Lucien Happersberger, Engin, who was Turkish, and Yaran Kazak. And these three men, all of whom were, for all intents and purposes, straight, right? He had romantic and I think I can't find the word, but evidence-wise,
right.
Physical relationships with,
right,
love relationships, and so what the book does is it goes through the journey of his authorship of various of his books,
right.
and of his politics, and of the stories, the short stories that he wrote, and the nonfiction that he wrote, and shows how these relationships affected the way he wrote, and how they were catalysts when he was, had writer's block and when he couldn't get through, and how these relationships really shaped the way he discussed what he discussed.
Right. I seem to remember, and I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, but when he was writing one of his books, he went up in the Swiss cabins with Lucien, and he was sort of sequestered, and like he was very much like in the world, Paris and Turkey, and having these different adventures with these different lovers. And I do remember like a really dramatic scene when he almost killed himself. Like, it was a very passionate, dramatic, romantic life, that he had going on.
Very passionate existence. I mean, when, in the Swiss, when he lived in, with Lucien's family had like this little sort of castle in the mountains,
right?
And he went there sort of when he was experiencing writer's block, and he went there and sort of holed up in this little place,
right?
And, cranked out this book while being in love with this man. And he, in Notes of it, I believe it's in Notes of a Native Son, which is one of his nonfiction, a collection of essays. He talks about being this white guy walking around in the village, in this little Swiss village. I believe it's in Switzerland.
Right.
And being sort of not an outcast, but clearly the sort of, center of attention, and being completely otherworldly. Right.
Right.
Then with Engin, he met this Turkish actor in New York when he was, doing a production of they were making a play out of one of his books and workshopping it, and he met this Turkish actor, and years later ended up going back to Turkey because he, like many other Black intellectuals and performers of that day, had difficulty being creative in the United States under the reign of racism and feeling so oppressed, and many of them spent time in Europe,
right?
And he ended up going to Turkey, and I think he was in Turkey for 10 years.
Yeah.
And became a part of Turkish cultural life, and was completely involved with this man and his wife. It was this really interesting relationship, right? And then, of course, in the latter years with Yaran, who I don't know if you remember this, but Nick tells this wonderful story about how they were clearly in love for a certain amount of time, and he was going through Yaran's writings that his wife, his widow, had.
Okay,
and she pulled out all these letters that they had corresponded to back and forth that she still had, and she pulls out this letter and reads it to Nick, the author, out loud, and it was a letter that Jimmy had sent to Yaran that spoke about, his love and his longing for him. And this is the wife of the man that she was married to, who had this sort of affair of the heart, and who at the same time was never going to give himself completely to Jimmy, and just sort of the ennui of that, and the sadness and the pang of that was something that was so incredible for this woman to share. And there's those things that make this book different. It's those discoveries and those unearthings.
Right. Because I will be listening and I'll go, oh, I knew that. Oh, I didn't know that. Because I did a pretty deep dive, and it's been a few years, but there were new things that I was like, oh, I didn't know about that. And I'm sure I'll continue to hear more of them as I listen. When you do a big sort of, this feels like a pretty big high profile project, do you read the whole book in advance, or do you read it as you go? Or I'm sure it depends on the project, but how did you approach this one?
Every narrator reads the entire book before going into the booth, even if it's skimming.
Yeah.
For a book like this, It required a real thorough pre-read.
Right.
But part of the process of the work that we do is to read a book in advance, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, not the least of which every narrator you'll ever meet will have the story of how, say, in a book of fiction, for example, they're reading, narrating, and then all of a sudden on page 206, the author says, "She said," with her Southern accent. And you realize that you didn't pick that up and you've not used a Southern accent for the entire book.
Right.
And you've got to go back and re-record everything from the beginning.
Oh, shit.
And every narrator I know has that story. I have that story. It happened to me.
What was yours? Do you remember?
Mine was a romance. Yeah, it was a romance. And the guy was from South Carolina and had, what the author said was a South Carolina lilt to his voice. And I'd read the book, but I just didn't. I skimmed over that and didn't see it, and it was on page like 206.
All right.
But in the case of, and also in the case of fiction, it's a matter of storytelling, and you know this from being a performer. You want to know where the story peaks. You want to know when you have to. Maybe not necessarily telegraph something, but where you have to lean into a particular point to plant the seed so that the listener goes, oh, maybe this is going to circle back later, right?
Right.
You know then, because in a work of 6 hours or 8 hours or 10 hours of an audiobook, much less a book of this length, which was 25 hours, right? If everything is important, nothing's important. Like, you have to know what to hit and what not to hit. And you don't know that unless you've read it ahead of time.
Right. Like if it's a thriller and something's an important clue, or like somebody's lying, but you can't, you know what I mean? It's important to know all of those things.
Exactly.
Whenever I see like a meme of James Baldwin or a quote of his somewhere or whatever, I think, shit, he was right about everything. He's right about everything.
Yeah.
What was it like to be working on this project at this time?
It was it was disheartening in a way.
Heartbreaking.
And heartbreaking, exactly, because you realize that so many things have changed and so many things have stayed the same.
Yeah.
Or things have come full circle, made a full circle, and we're still dealing with at least we're still dealing with some of the same things that he was dealing with. One of the things that was so powerful that he said was that we are not going to move. And I'm talking now about racial politics.
Right.
We're not going to move ahead until we can all be honest about what is.
Right.
And really say it out loud about what is and confront it. And he was very specific. He was like, and until white people in this country do that, we're going to stay in the same place.
Right.
And it was very prescient, and sad, as you say, because it's still actually incredibly relevant, if not even more so because of what's going on right now.
Yeah. And there was a point in his youth where he's like, I got to get the fuck out of America or I'm going to die. And he goes to Paris. But there was also a point I remember, and I haven't gotten to that part of the book yet, where he was like, I have to go back. I have to go back and sort of be a voice, right?
Yeah.
Do you get emotional reading these books? Does it ever sneak up on you?
Sure. Absolutely. There's a time and place for that emotion. If there's a time and place for that emotion to come through in the reading, in the narration, sometimes it isn't appropriate. Sometimes it is. Sometimes and this is the same as it is on stage or on screen. Sometimes something is more emotional if the actor is holding back and is restrained, and it allows the audience to have the catharsis.
Right.
But I mean, I like to say that there's at least one or two books. People always go, what's your favorite book you've ever narrated? And I can't come up with just one, but I do say that there is a book, at least one book every year, if I'm lucky, that changes me, that impacts me. And this is one of those books. The very end of this book, it's so beautiful. And I'm not going to, you haven't finished it yet. So
no, I'm in the middle.
But the end of this book is really beautiful. And it was really difficult. I ended the book and I saved the raw audio file,
Right.
and then I cried,
Right.
because of the beauty and how much I am moved by the actual story and the way it's written. And that, I feel lucky to have those experiences in my work.
But you can usually keep it together while you're narrating, and then maybe like, okay, I'm going to take a few minutes here.
Yeah,
I get emotional doing these interviews sometimes.
Yeah, I've had two books where I had to stop and start during the last 30 minutes because I was crying so hard, and to the point where you could hear the difference in my voice and my sinuses because I've been blubbering, and we had to stop for 15 minutes till my voice sounded normal again, and then try to
pull
get
it
through.
Together, kid.
Yeah. And that's happened twice, and very specifically. And both those books were on that list of books that changed me by the impact of the story.
What were they, if I may ask?
Yeah, one was called King and the Dragonflies, and it's a young adult fiction about a gay tween. Coming of age story for a gay tween in rural Louisiana, written by trans author Kaysen Callender, and this story is so remarkably beautiful and so incredibly well told. And it was, I was a mess at the end trying to get through the last chapter. Because it's so well told, right? And the other book was called Ghost of the Innocent Man, and it's about the inception and creation of the Innocence Project. I don't know if you would know what that is, but it's a nonprofit that helps to try to gather DNA evidence to help get people who have been incorrectly put on death row, and who have been sentenced to death when actually there's been no evidence or there's been judicial misconduct. Right. And this book was about how white DAs and judges and lawyers and politicians on both sides of the political spectrum came together because they actually saw that this was a real thing and that this needed to happen. And it follows a story of three men who were sort of the first cases, and one of them in particular. And it follows his story. And after 26 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, he gets out. And that story is it's so heartbreaking and impactful. And he gets out, and he finally he has a house, and he has his little riding lawnmower, and he mows his lawn, and he mows the neighbor's lawn, and he finally has a life. And then in the very end of the book, he gets pulled over by a cop driving a car who doesn't believe that it could possibly be his car because he's black. And that's how that story ends. And it was getting through that last chapter was really difficult too.
Wow. I imagine you learn a lot doing this.
Oh my gosh.
Like, what are the kinds of things
why I
you've
love
learned?
it so much.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I love it so much. I've done books. I'm very fortunate in the fact that, and somewhat of a unicorn in this business, because I do a great diversity, a great variety of books. Right. I do children's picture books. I do middle grade books. I do young adult books. I've sci-fi, fantasy, romance, nonfiction, and literary fiction. Right. And so I'm constantly learning and being exposed to all kinds of literature and all kinds of ideas. Particularly nonfiction, I learned so much, like the whole Innocence Project, learning about all of that was something. Right. I've done books about medicine and medical marijuana and private equity and all these things, and it's wonderful to be challenged not only as a performer, particularly when you're doing fiction and having to do a lot of different voices and stuff, but also nonfiction and getting to learn a lot of stuff. And I'm a creature of learning. I love it, so I feel very fortunate.
How are you directed? I imagine some books are like, here, go do it, send us the files later. And other times I imagine, is there a producer working with you and saying, hey, do that again, or you mispronounced that name, or like, how does that work?
It's very rare that you have a director. Right. In fact, there's only one publishing house that routinely has a director with you on the line while you're narrating a book. If you go into a booth, oftentimes, otherwise, apart from that publisher, if you go into a booth, oftentimes if there's a person, meaning you're not recording at home, they actually send you to a facility. The person that's listening to you is a hybrid director and engineer, and so they might not give you that much feedback, maybe a little bit. Oftentimes, if you do a book that's very big, meaning you think it's going to get a lot of attention, then you can ask for a director. You can say, hey, I'd really like to have a director. But for the most part, you are just given the book and away you go.
Yeah, send us the files. For the Baldwin book, did you have much direction?
Nope. The direction was at the beginning. Yeah. So this circles back to the question that you asked earlier about the voice, right?
Yeah.
So when I first sent this files in, I was I barely changed my voice enough to differentiate that it was a quote. Right. So oftentimes we'll say, when you're narrating an audiobook, when you get to a quote, we say you lift it a little bit. So the listener knows that it's a quote.
Right.
As opposed to just within the speech. Right. And so I did that with just a little hint of flavor. And the note that I got back for the reread was, the author really likes what you're doing in the Baldwin, and he wants you to go further. Right. Like really go there. And I was like, really? Because that's not normally what I would do, or what, we would do in a standard narration situation. But it was what the author and the publisher requested. And so that's what I did. And I'm glad I did it, because the feedback has been very good.
It's very effective. It's very effective. As a listener, I love it. It. You bring him to life in a way, in a wonderful way. Did you interact one-on-one with the author at all? Did you ever have contact with him?
Not during the process. Right. So that's another thing that's true for audiobooks, is oftentimes you don't get that. You will, any feedback that you get happens at the very beginning. Yeah. There are some books where you may do the first 15 minutes, and then there's a process of getting feedback after you've done like the first chapter or something, Right. But more often than not, once you have the book in hand, that's it. You don't get any interaction. And, part of that too is they don't want the narrator to be micromanaged by the author. And there's a real,
they want to keep a distance,
real wall there. Yeah. There's a real wall there. Yeah. I was, Nick has, Nicholas Boggs is the author, and he is a huge fan of the audiobook, and very, very generous and very, very egoless. And, he reached out to me as soon as the book was done. He reached out to me on Instagram and was like, oh my God, I love what you've done, and thank you so much. And he's included me in, a lot of the PR stuff. And then he, as it turns out, when he was on his book tour, he was in LA, and he has a colleague that I went to university with who runs the community outreach program here at the Palm Springs Art Museum. Right. And so she created a last-minute program that was him being interviewed by yet another colleague of theirs who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, Jose. I can't remember Jose's last name. I'll come up with it in a minute. And so they created an event where he interviewed Nick on stage, and then I came out 2 or 3 times and read sections of the book while they had, images from the color plates from the photographs of the book on the screen behind us, this sort of multimedia thing. And so Nick and I got to actually meet in person and hung out afterwards and talked about the process and all those things.
I bet that would have been a wonderful thing to see.
Oh my God, it was great.
How do you manage it when you're not that engaged in the actual book? When it's dry or boring or not that good? Or how do you do it?
Yeah, when it's an uphill push.
Yes. Yeah. As we like to say, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, honestly, I've been really lucky. It's very rarely that a book does not engage me on enough of a level where I feel like it's work.
Right.
Sometimes though it is. And that's when it becomes more of a job and not a joy. Right. And it's a job.
Yeah.
And then the job is to lift the material.
Yeah.
Right. And I think most people who are in this world, whether they are, actors, with scripts, TV, whatever, when you have really good material, your job is almost to get out of its way, just to be a channel. And then you get material sometimes where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to really pull in
make this material. Sing. Yeah.
Right. And in that case, then you just do the work. It's just discipline. That's when your craft really comes to bear, and you have to do your best to make it work and make it sing, as you say. And you have to talk to yourself. You have to tell yourself, listen, your opinion doesn't matter here. Just make it. Just get it done.
Just do it. Do you have notes on your script? I imagine you have just like 8.5 by 11 pages, like a manuscript. Is that what you're reading from?
We're reading from iPads because you don't want the sound of pages in the booth.
Yes.
Right. So everything's on an iPad.
And what do you do with the Baldwin? He's in Paris now when I'm listening, and there's all these French words, and you do a great job with those, but I wouldn't be able to do those on the fly. Like, what do you do with things that you have to prepare? Like, I have to figure out how to pronounce that. I don't know the name of that place. This is all done in advance, I would think.
That's right. That's when you asked earlier if we read the book in advance. Yeah. Part of the prep work is for situations like that, especially if you're doing a piece of nonfiction that has a lot of terms for a particular industry or languages and places. So in this case, I had enough French in school and spent enough time in Switzerland, in French-speaking Geneva, and some parts of France where my French is passable. It's not a big challenge to figure out the pronunciation for French things, but the Turkish stuff was a nightmare of a bear.
And what do you do? Do you make notes on the iPad? Like, how do you
make notes?
Do it for yourself?
Well, first of all, you find resources where hopefully the words are being spoken by a native speaker.
Right.
So in the instance of most of the Turkish, and there were the names of streets and cities, and occasionally an ashtray or a glass or something. You can find a lot of those things online where Turkish people are saying those words. Whether it be a news report or something.
Right.
And so you research those, and you link them, and then you either, there's this particular software that I use on the iPad, you can actually record at a particular spot. So I could record myself saying it and put it right there. So when I get there, I just pause and I listen to it, and I repeat it a couple of times, and then I go back and I start that sentence again and I read it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stop and go, right? Also, people will sometimes translate it into IPA or some kind of phonetic spelling,
right,
and type the phonetic spelling onto the page with the iPad right above the word or below the word. And that's how you do it. And then when the whole thing is done, when you're done with what we call the raw audio, you'll send that to the publisher and the editor, and you'll get back a corrections package, what we call a pickup package.
Right.
And in those are places where you've mispronounced a word or you've garbled a word. And in that, they will provide, where you made the mistake, how you said it, and what you should have said instead.
Right.
So for places where you miss it, that's the quality control that picks it up on a second pass. Yeah.
I would imagine, just as a writer getting notes back, like I would get that pickup packet and it'd be, oh, it's only 4 things. Or like my self-esteem would be tied to that pickup packet.
Yeah.
Is that a dynamic?
If you get a book back and you've got like 100 pickups, you go, oh my God, where was I?
I know what happened.
Now a book like this, like you said, where there's like French and Turkish, there's a lot more forgiveness, right? Because that's tough. It's not common, and oftentimes in this world, the way, there's a lot of authenticity, kept in mind when it comes to casting. Now, if there's a book that's set in Turkey, right, that has Turkish protagonists, they do their best to find someone who either is Turkish or who has experience living there, or someone who can address the material as authentically as possible, right?
Right.
But otherwise, if you're dealing with something that's sort of multicultural and you're in the center of it, it's your job to do the best to the best that you can.
Yeah. I'm curious about the business of audiobooks in general. When I had my 2 novels come out, one in 98 and 2002, I really wanted to do audios, and I was able to do them. And I had my friends come in and we did a full cast thing, but it was like not a big business thing. One was on cassette, one was on CDs. Like there wasn't even a thing like that. But I think now people listen to them way more than they ever have before, or is there a wave when it's really in or not? I know having it on your phone makes a big difference, but like what's been the trajectory of the business generally?
Audiobook business has grown by double digits for the past several years, like double-digit growth. In 2024, which is the most recent data there is for, I think audiobooks made over $2 billion in gross profit. That's how big the business is. It's a huge business. And and that is why, going back to an earlier point that I made, that is why authors and their agents and representation now are so much more invested in who's narrating the book.
Right.
Because the audiobook has become such a large part of the money-making process. And in fact, there's a couple of genres, and I can't quote you which one. It's either genres or a particular publisher, but we're getting to the point where audio is starting to outsell print.
That's really interesting. It doesn't surprise me, but I'm asking because when I was writing Imagine Life and I did some other narrative podcasts like Even the Rich, those have sort of gone out of vogue in the podcast world in favor of personality-driven stuff like Amy Poehler and Smartless. So written podcasts have started going down, and those shows, I don't even think they exist anymore. But it seems like in terms of audiobooks, what you're doing, that's continuing to go up and grow.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
And there's an increasing diversification in the kind of production that's being done. You know, so before, right, when audiobooks first started, and they were books for the blind, literally.
Yeah.
And they were on tape, and they were called books on tape, as you noted, right? Now we have, and you just read it. It was just a flat read, right? Then you have, and I'm going to credit Jim Dale, and he might not be the right person, but he is in my mind. Then you have somebody like Jim Dale, who did the first recordings of all the Harry Potter books.
Right.
And he did all these voices.
Yeah.
Right. And it sort of exploded, and it changed the trajectory of what audience expect from narration.
Right.
Now audience expect not a reading, but a performance.
Yes.
When you listen to a book, you expect a performance. And so it's changed the way people narrate. And ever increasingly now, you have, like you just talked about your book, you have multicast things where you might have 4, 5, 10 people, narrating a book and it being integrated. Sometimes you have it where that cast is all in the same room at the same time reading the book, which is more like a radio play that we used to do. Sometimes you have what we call duets, where I will read half the book because, let's say it's a romance, and there's the protagonist. One protagonist has every other chapter, and I'll read all those. Right. And then the other protagonist will have the other POV, and they'll read those chapters. Right. So there's all these different variations as the form expands and grows, and people become more demanding about what they hear.
How do people get paid for a book? Is it like, here's the fee for the book, or is it an hourly thing? Like, how does that work, or does it depend?
Let me start with saying there are no residuals.
Oh.
That's the biggest thing.
So it doesn't matter how successful it is; it's a buyout.
Right.
Boom.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Boom. It's a flat fee buyout, and the rate it's union. It's all union work. Yeah. For those of you who are out there listening, who are interested, it's union work. It's covered by AFTRA.
Right.
And it's what's called a flat per finished hour rate. And when I say finished hour, it means finished. So how long is the book when it's done?
Right.
Right. So the Baldwin book was just shy of 25 hours.
Right.
So I got paid per finished hour. So whatever my rate was for that book times 25 hours, not the time I spent researching.
No,
not the time that I'm in the booth recording it. Right. So when you negotiate your rate, if you're lucky enough to be able to negotiate a rate, you want to, you need to cover the cost of all that time that you're prepping
all the work that goes into it.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. So, like I said, it's covered by SAG. And so there are minimum rates.
Yeah. What's the minimum for like the SAG after?
Well, this is the thing. Every publisher has every publisher has their own negotiated rate with SAG.
Interesting.
Unlike like film and TV where there's like a collective bargain.
Yeah.
One scale. There's every publisher, every producer that has a relationship with SAG has its own scale. Has its own scale, and unfortunately, I can't tell you what that is because they're all different.
Right.
Some of them are lower than others, and they get really pissed when they find out that
others are whatever
rates. So yeah.
I'm in a playwriting group, and when we read pages, sometimes I'll be like the screen directions. And I have this rush, like, I'm going to read this really good. I'm going to do my best reading. I'm going to be good reader, man. And it's kind of exciting. And I was like, I nailed that. But I imagine you get a bit of that going, but then like hour after hour. But it is that thing of like, there is a rush to like wanting to do that well, the reading well. Sure. And I imagine that that's something that's part of what you do carried over 12 hours,
Yeah, absolutely. Because, the way I think of it, and this is my personal approach, I think of it as cinematic. I feel that when you listen to a book that I'm narrating, I want you to feel like you're in the movie of that book. And so I'm responsible, if the shot is of a valley, and you are coming over the crest of a hill and you see this valley, a forested valley before you, and you start going down the hill through tall grass and, you feel the dampness of the earth, getting your sneakers wet and you smell the wetness of the pine, right? All those things. I imagine that the camera is showing you that, right? That's what you're seeing in the film. And my job in those places where there's not dialogue is to give you the richness of the visual experience that you would have with my voice and the description that I'm giving you, so that you get a real sense of not just what you're seeing, but how it feels under your feet and how it smells. And so that's the challenge. And that's the wonderful challenge and the joy of this work when you approach it that way.
The texture. You're creating a texture. How many hours a day are you good for? And when are you like, I'm out?
I mean, if I'm in a booth where someone else is engineering, where I'm not self-engineering, which doesn't happen as much anymore. But when I was living in LA and I went into the booth for all my books, that's a 6-hour shift. Yeah. Right. So you go in for 6 hours. Right. And you maybe take, you take a couple of breaks and you take a half an hour, 45 minutes for lunch. Yeah. It's a long day. Here at home, I do shorter days because sometimes I will also work for like later today, I'm going to go in the booth for 2 hours, and knock something out. So that I give myself shorter days because I have a more flexible schedule, and I can move it around. But the most I ever want to do is 6 hours. That's the most I would ever want to do. But normally it's more like between 4 and 5. It's draining to do that kind of energy. So at a certain point you're like, okay, I'm out. How do you treat your voice in terms of like care for it? And what if you have a cold? Like, what are your little tricks? If I have a cold, I don't work. Yeah, that's it. Because my voice sounds too different. And if I start a book with even half a cold and then end it, I'm going to sound too different by the end of the book. So I just had a cold. So I lost like a week and a half of work. I just didn't work. I just didn't do it. Warm, lots of water in between. You're mostly concerned. It's very rarely that you have to be concerned about vocal burnout or vocal fry when you're talking because you're mic'd. the podcast world can't see, but I'm holding my hand about 6 inches from my face.
Yeah.
That's how close the mic is, right? It's very intimate.
Right.
So, the challenge with the work then is when someone's yelling or excited, how you do that in a way that conveys that without you yelling, because if you yell, you're just going to blow it out and you're going to record correctly. The biggest thing is keeping hydrated, keeping your throat hydrated and your body hydrated, because oftentimes if you get too dry, you make a lot of mouth noise. Yeah. And the editors get mad. But just, warm beverages, I mean, people swear by, Fisherman Friends and all these other things. I have a little squirt bottle that has a little just water in it, and I'll open up and squirt water down my throat on my cords, and I drink a lot in between. And what you can't do is you can't go out to a bar or a club or, anywhere where you might be a party where you might be talking loud to be heard over other people, right? Because then the next day you'll pay for it and you won't be able to record. That's more of a challenge. Yeah. What's your booth like? Did you make yourself a sexy little home booth with like cool? I didn't make it. I bought it. Yes. Yeah. So I bought a very sexy booth. Studio Brick. Studio Brick is the name of the company. Right on. I like it. They're in Spain. And they make these standalone booths that are gorgeous to look at, and you can customize them in different ways you want. They make a standard size. I bought a slightly larger than standard size, so I can stand up in mine, and I can also, I have more of a wingspan sideways, so it's very comfortable inside. It doesn't feel like a coffin. Yeah. And that booth is maybe like 4.5 feet by 6.5 feet by 8 feet. Yeah. Right. It barely fits underneath the ceiling fan that's in my 9-foot ceiling room that it's in. Right. Right. I got so lucky. And the booths aren't soundproof. Nothing can be, unless you're in a booth that's like within the center of a building, right, in a basement. Your stuff is going to come through mostly low frequencies, like the rumbling of garbage trucks and stuff, right, or the rumbling of airplanes where it's a low sound. High sounds are easier to block than low sounds. Yeah. So I got this gorgeous booth, and I bought it right before the pandemic. I bought it like maybe a year before the pandemic, and because when the pandemic hit, all the studios closed and you couldn't go record, right? Then I happened to have this booth. And so whereas most people did nothing during the pandemic, I worked harder than I ever have in my life. Right. There's something else to do. I was working on these podcasts for Wondery at the time, and the narrators were sent home booths and tutored on how to do it. And they scrambled, but they made it work, and we were able to keep putting out episodes, and people wanted them because they needed the distraction. Have you ever done sexy stuff like a heated rivalry thing? Have you ever done a steamy? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I've done several of them, both straight and gay. I love the fact that heated romance has made it into the cultural zeitgeist, because if you like heated rivalry, you like heated rivalry, you don't have to wait for season 2 to dive into more of that kind of stuff, because there is thousands of books out there that are what we call romance. And if your thing is male-female romance, there's that too, right? And sapphic romance, right? But there's a whole world of romance that covers every sort of subgenre. So heated rivalry is like, enemies to friends. Enemies to lovers, right? But there's also slow burn friends to lovers. Right. There is age gap stuff. There is, throuple stuff. Anything you could think of, and all of it is narrated. You can get narrated versions, which do exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is create a world with all the sex scenes and all the stuff being said and spoken, in much more detail than you got in Heated Rivalry, right? Much more explicit, and So a couple that I've done that I really liked, Illegal Contact by Riley Hart and Nev Wilder.
Great title. Great title.
Yeah. Illegal Contact. And it's about two guys in football and it goes from their years in football camp in high school through college and into the pros, and one of them is black and carrying the financial support, the financial responsibility of taking care of his family, and the other guy is more of a sort of a dilettante, who's had the world given to him, and they just hate each other. And then of course end up, screwing like maniacs and then, end up, in a relationship and then coming out, it's very, very similar.
Right.
It's called Illegal Contact. That's a good one.
All right. We'll check that out.
Yeah. There's and like I said, tons of football.
Yeah.
There's one I did called Dirty Steel, which is baseball, which is baseball.
Baseball. Right? I love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Dirty Steel.
Dirty Steel. And then there's one called Tempting Him, which is about, which is sort of takes place in a more of a business setting, which is a young guy who's just about to graduate from college who ends up interning, at this big firm and ends up having a relationship with the CEO, who's in his late 40s, right? It's a big age gap.
Right.
And, and of course the CEO and the guy's father are friends, there's a whole thing, right? But there's so much out there,
right?
That's really enjoyable, Yeah.
I love it. When you first got into this, did it feel like, oh, here's another way I can use my acting talent? Did it feel like, oh, I'd rather be on camera? Like, how did you feel about it when this direction started to happen in your career?
When it first happened, I just thought of it as a side gig. I was like, oh, here's a side gig. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I was, I had just come off this Nickelodeon show called True Jackson. I didn't have another regular gig. It was back to like co-star here, guest star there,
right?
And I was teaching a little bit, and I needed some money, and I'd been wanting for a while to do like a gay movie. Like the gay movies that are shot like Rob Williams. That's last name, Rob Williams. One of his films, just something where I would get to be like a gay man actually in a relationship or relating to somebody.
Right.
Because I've got a great TV career, but it was all playing professionals and nobody has ever got to be in a relationship with anybody.
Yeah.
And so I met with an actor friend of mine, David Pevsner, who
I know David.
Yeah.
He's been on the podcast.
Yeah. So he just to talk about that whole movie subculture and how to break into it. And then David said to me, "What are you doing for money?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing this and that." And he said, "Well, have you ever thought about audiobooks?" And I was like, "Oh, no, I haven't." He's like, "I do it." He goes, I do a lot of, erotica. And, I could introduce you to the guy who's the producer. And I was like, sure. I was like, I love to read.
Right.
And I love to talk. It sounds like a dream job.
Right.
And so he introduced me to a guy named Zach Harries, who was the former owner, no longer, but former owner of a production house named Mosaic Audio. And I went in and, he just sent in my resume. And then a couple weeks later, Zach got this book that was like 800 pages or 1,600 pages, and he needed 6 black narrators. And it was, literature and sociology and the history of black literature and sociology from the late 1800s to date. And I auditioned for him, and he said, "Yes, do this." And so I did that, and that was my first book. And I was like, "This is great. I have a great side hustle,
Right, because it is using your tools.
Because it's still performing. And this is the thing. I really approach it as an acting job, and for me, it is an acting job, and I love it. And then, about a year into it, I was just doing a couple books a year, and I did a book that got nominated. I did a book with another narrator, Bonnie Turpin is her name, and it was nominated for our version of the Oscars, which are called the Audies.
Right.
And with that came the opportunity to sort of launch a larger career if I wanted one. And I had someone ask me who wanted to be my champion and said, if you want to do this, you could really do this.
Right.
And I said, yeah, because, I was still getting TV jobs, but like one TV job a month wasn't paying my bills.
Yeah.
And, and I was getting tired of the hustle. My dad had been ill and was dying, and I was traveling home to the Bahamas a lot, and I wasn't available to auditions. My agent dropped me, and I totally get it. I just wasn't around,
Right.
But I needed something that came to me, and the work came to me.
Right.
And so I said yes,
Yeah.
And I still feel like I'm performing every time I'm in the booth.
Yeah.
And I'm making, not just performing too, but making directorial decisions. You asked before about no one's directing me. I'm directing myself, and I'll finish a line and I'll go, no, that's not quite right. She's probably not that angry here. Let me take that back and do it again because she's going to peak later in the scene. I have that kind of mindset working when I'm in the booth. So it's really fulfilling.
When you make a decision like that to change a line reading, do you have to do something with the files that you send in, or do you just say to the engineer, use the last one? Or like, how do you make sure that the next people that are working on these files follow your intent, I guess?
Yeah. When you're self-recording, you use a technique called punch and roll. And that just means that when you punch, which means you hit record,
right,
you're recording. And if I do something, as soon as it comes out of my mouth, part of you as the director is listening.
Right. You're like, I could do that better.
I know I can do that better. 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah.
Right. But then sometimes it's like, there's always the challenge of not being perfectionist and spending too much time trying to agonizing over one moment. That's not worth it. But there's sometimes where I'll read a line, I'll be like, oh, no. What the author wanted, this line means this, and I didn't say it that way. And what you do is you simply stop the roll. You take your cursor back to before where you made the mistake. So you can see on the screen, it's like a waveform, right?
Okay.
You see what it looks like. That's going on the screen in front of you while you're recording. You've got the software set up. So you're seeing your voice translated into digital waveforms as you're speaking.
Right.
And, once you do it for a couple of days, roughly how far back you have to go to punch in.
Yeah.
So you stop the roll. You go back to before you made the mistake. You put your cursor there and you hit record, and you have a setup in your software that what's called pre-roll. And what that does is it'll play the 3 seconds or 2 seconds before you speak.
Yeah.
So you can punch in, so you can start talking. You pick it up right where you left off, and you just redo the line that you want to redo, and then you just keep going.
Love it. Interesting.
So when you send that to the editor, it's already got,
it's pretty clean.
You've taken care of whatever mistakes you are aware of, you've taken care of already.
Do you listen to them in your free time, or are you like, no, I need music?
Do I listen to audiobooks?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a lot, but I do.
Yeah.
This fall, I've listened to them more than I ever have. I've become obsessed with this series that is what we call lit RPG, and I never listened to anything in the genre before, and it's so good that I'm just obsessed.
What is lit RPG? Good. What is that?
It's lit RPG is sort of where they take the conceit of the world, like the gaming world, right, and they put it inside sort of like a real story or a sci-fi or fantasy story, right? So the conceits of where they're different enemies, where there's different levels,
right,
where there's different skills that you acquire, all the things that people play like with Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing,
right,
is in the world of a story. So aliens land on your planet and they turn it into a big game world, and you've got to survive different levels in order to survive, right? Being obliterated. And I would have never chosen. I mean, I've never narrated anything in that world. I've never listened to anything, but my brother-in-law is a huge fan, and he gave me and he said, I just want you to try this. And I struggled with like the first 2 or 3 chapters, and I was just listening to it because he gave it to me, and I wanted to tell him I listened to it, and I became obsessed.
You're obsessed. I love it. All right.
It is so this particular series, which many people would say it's called Dungeon Crawler Carl, which many people would say is the sort of ultimate in this whole world, is just fantastic. And the narrator, Jeff Hayes, is astonishing. The number of voices and characters and how well it's done. It sounds like there's 100 different people in this book. It's really quite amazing. So I listened to that. Yeah. And I've listened to, there's been a couple of times where like I did a couple of sort of Jason Bourne kind of books, Treadstone books, and I'd never done anything in that genre before. So I listened to 2 or 3 of them before I did that, just to see what the world was like and feel what it was like. And oftentimes if I'm going on a road trip, I'll have, podcasts, but I'll also have an audiobook. Yeah. There's a couple of narrators that I really, really like. And when they do say a book that's very lauded, I'll make sure that I listen to that because I know they're going to be fantastic. Yeah.
Because sometimes the wrong narrator can be like, oh, there was a book I listened to last year where I was like, this isn't the voice but usually it's a good fit and they're like, great. But once in a while you're like, that wasn't what I would pick.
Yep. I hear that. It's a really subjective thing. And I've had people say, oh, this narrator really ruined it for me, or this narrator really made it for me. Yeah. And there are some narrators have huge fan bases, particularly in the romance world. Yeah. And in the lit RPG world, which I just mentioned. There are some people who are they're huge. Yeah. Huge fans,
Does it get lonely? Do you ever wish you could be in a cast and with other people?
Lonely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. But I know
we talk about that. As narrators, we talk about that. We talk about sort of fighting the loneliness because it's, you're working by yourself all the time. So there's, among many narrators, there's a concerted effort to make sure that you are connecting not just in your home with whoever's around you, but also with other people in your industry, whether it's getting on a Zoom call or getting on Discord and chatting for a few minutes every day so that you don't feel so isolated. But it's a real thing.
Yeah, I can imagine, for sure. You were part of the 1619 project.
I was.
Yes. What an important thing to be a part of. What was that like? And what part did you do in it? How were you involved?
I was, what they did was they divided the essays and the pieces among, a group of narrators. Right. So I did not have to audition for that. I was, fortunate to just be offered a selection because I'd worked with the publisher before and the producer on that project. And those are projects where you feel like, I'm here to be of service. I'm so grateful to be involved in this and to be of service in something that is so sort of important and hopefully impactful. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's very cool. You grew up in the Bahamas. When did you come to the States?
My parents split up when I was 4. Yeah. And my mom's American. My mom's from upstate New York.
Right on.
I was born in the Bahamas and when they split up when I was 4, but then we went back to the Bahamas when I was about 8. And during my time here, I became a naturalized citizen, because she was American. So it was a process. But then we went back to the Bahamas and they didn't get back together, but we stayed there. So I was able to spend time with my father, and have that relationship. But I was there until I left for college. Wow. Yeah. And once I graduated from college, I stayed here, because I got a real job. I didn't study arts in college. I got a real job. I moved to DC. I worked for a law firm as an economic analyst, and crunched numbers and wrote briefs and did all that. But I was studying acting at night, and I did a couple of plays in community theater, and then I got a job at Arena Stage, and then I got a job at Woolly Mammoth, and then I was like, okay, maybe I should give this acting thing a go. Yeah. And that's when I, for a very long story short, ended up getting connected with the Atlantic Theater Company in New York, and chose to go and study with them in Vermont. And I took a leave of absence from the law firm for 3 summers and went and studied acting. And then they asked me to become a company member, and I quit my job and moved to New York to be an actor.
There you do it. I often wonder if there was some other path that I was meant to be on that had more stability, more security. Like, did I miss an off ramp? Because this road has not always been clear or particularly smooth. But you did the real job. You did it.
I did that first, yeah.
And so you know what it was like. Did you feel like unfulfilled, or this is not what I want to be doing, or this dichotomy between like the safe thing and the creative thing? It feels like the theme of my life. And so I'm always talking to people who have either quit the arts thing and gone to something else, or started in it and was like, I've got this. I know you through Barbara Deutsch, that pilot light thing where you have to do something, or you kind of go crazy a little bit.
You know, I think that if I, you know, there's different ways to sort of categorize or qualify regret, right? And when I moved to New York, I still worked for the law firm, because literally a month before I was supposed to move, someone said to me, "Oh, it's interesting that you're going to be in New York. You know, so-and-so and so-and-so, two partners in the firm, are opening up a New York office." And I went, "What? There's going to be office space?" And so as it turns out, I was able to do theater in New York and work flex hours, continuing my job for many more years, right? The thing about that is there's something about singular focus and risk taking that I think changes the dynamic and makes you hungry in a way that is not desperate, but hungry in a way that is important. I think that if I would have started my acting career 10 years earlier, that I probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now about audiobooks. You know, I think I would probably have had a series of regular jobs on TV and living a different life. I don't know that, but I think that sometimes. But when I decided that I wanted to move, and I gave my formal notice because I didn't know this New York office was going to be open at the time. It seemed like a huge risk for me, but I thought, I don't want to get to the end of my life and think what would have happened if I would have tried.
Right.
Didn't want to have that specific regret. Right. And so I'm really grateful. Yeah. I'm really grateful. It as you've said, as you know, it hasn't been easy. But I've had so many incredible experiences, been involved in so many wonderful shows and so many projects, and, sang with a band in Europe and toured. I mean, I've done all of these things, and it's been such a fulfilling artistically, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, taking that risk and changing my trajectory was the best thing I ever did for myself.
Yeah, you did. Were people in your life like, what are you doing? Were you supported in that change?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, my mom was afraid, but she never said don't. But she was afraid. My dad wasn't at all, because my dad was an entertainer. Right. My dad, who has the same singer name, I read, Ron Butler. Yeah. Was the number one recording artist of the Bahamas for like 6 decades. And is considered the godfather of Bahamian music and singer-songwriter. And so he made a living, sometimes eked out a living, sometimes made an incredible living, and everything in between as a full-time musician. Right. And so he was never, he was never the harbinger of doom. He was always like, no, I think you should go for it if you want to go for it, Yeah. It was more me. It was more me of like, being afraid of not having any kind of security. Yeah. It's a real thing. Yeah. Not being used. And I have friends now who are like, they're retiring early for 1 year, for one reason or another, and they still have to work, or people who are thinking of leaving much later in life to do things that are creative, and they're not used to not knowing where their money's going to come from in another month. And, you know, I've been living this way now for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's a muscle.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a muscle.
It's a muscle. You learn that, it'll work out, you know, but I think the majority of people don't have that muscle. And so it's really terrifying. And the first time you do it, it's terrifying.
Yeah. No. And it's a muscle that you keep having to go, oh, I guess I have to use that muscle again.
Yeah.
What do you think about Palm Springs moving there? Are you glad you did?
I'm so glad I did. You can't see it now, but I'm looking out at my backyard.
I saw pictures on your website. I'm like, that is really lovely.
Yeah, I was really fortunate and have found a wonderful home. I've got an amazing view. It gets colder here at night than LA, but you know, it's been 85 degrees for the past 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And the summers are blistering. They're brutal. But you know, I'm inside recording, so I'm in the air conditioner.
Yeah.
In air conditioning. But otherwise it is just a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. I love the size of the town. And it's a resort town, and it reminds me of growing up in the Bahamas. Because growing up in, you know, Nassau is a resort town. It's run by tourism, and you know, as a native, you sort of dip in and out of the tourist areas at will. You know, when you want to engage, and then and you step outside when you don't. And so there's a real similarity there. It reminds me of home in that way in terms of my lifestyle here. My sister and my nephews came to visit me for the first time since I lived here. And they've always like the desert. And as soon as they got here, they're like, oh, they totally got it.
This is like the Bahamas. Yeah.
We totally get it. You know,
I used to
down to like, there's palm trees in my view, you know, right down.
You performed with your dad on stage, I read. Like you would do, what would you sing? Like, or what was your role in that? I mean, that was when I was like a teen, and just coming up. But there were times when he had a big nightclub. Right. It's a very famous nightclub called Ronnie's Rebel Room. And this sounds like a movie in itself.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Like a Palm Royale vibe, you know.
And it was like I think it sat like maybe 400 people. Right. And it was behind a hotel. And in the heyday of the Bahamas and the Caribbean and all that stuff, I would say from the sort of very late 60s and all through the 70s, I mean, it was the place to go. So these cruise ships would come in, you know, and on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, you'd have these bus loads of tourists that would get driven from the cruise ship, you know, to the club. They'd come in and they'd have drinks. They'd see a show, and you know, my dad and his band played. But the show would be there was a limbo dancer and a fire dancer and a steel drummer, you know. And then my dad had a friend who was a drag queen, who was Bahamian, but who had, you know, emigrated to New York, but who came back for a while, and he was a featured performer in my dad's show for a year. Yeah, you know, so you'd have this whole show, and they would do that 3 times a night on Fridays and Saturdays, right? And then twice a night the rest of the week. I mean, and it would just packed them out. And so there was a time when I learned a few of his songs, and, you know, on the weekend when it wasn't a school night, I would get on stage and sing with him, you know, or I would come out and I would just sing one number, you know.
I love it. Were they original songs or were they
original Calypso songs of his?
Fantastic. Yeah. Was it? It felt glamorous. It sounded glamorous. It sounds like Vegas meets the islands. Like, was it glamorous?
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, you know, I grew up to the extent that you can. I mean, being a very big fish in a small pond, you know, there's the only other Bahamian that's more famous than my dad is Sidney Poitier. Right. Many people don't even know is Bahamian, but Sidney Poitier is Bahamian. Yeah. And other than that, you know, it's my dad. So, you know, going anywhere with him, you'd be driving along and people would call out his name and say hello, you know, anywhere on the island. Yeah. And growing up as Ronnie Butler Jr. was, as soon as I said that, people would be like, oh, you know. Yeah. So it was glamorous. Yeah, it was glamorous to a certain extent.
Yeah. I was looking at the different roles that you played in TV and like the pictures with Reba and all these cool things you've gotten to do. Did you ever get calls to do Obama? Because looking at you now on Zoom, I never thought that interpersonally, but looking at you at Zoom, and also my eyes aren't the best, I'm like, oh, he could do Obama if he wanted to.
Wait a minute. Did you not see that on my on my website, or are you just asking me that randomly?
No, I'm asking you randomly because I didn't see that on your website. Did
Okay.
did you actually do that on a thing?
Yeah, I never did it on, well, I take that back. I was going to say on a TV show.
Right.
What happened was, so I'll tell you this story. It's a great story.
Okay.
This was before his first election, like a year before.
Okay.
When was that? Was it 2002? 2004.
2004, I think he gave the convention speech.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
I think it was just wrong. So I think 2004 was the election, or maybe 2008 was the election.
2008 was when he was elected. Yeah.
Right,
2004,
exactly.
he gave
so
the convention
about
speech.
a year before that, 2007.
Right.
I was in a casting director workshop. You know those things?
Yeah.
And two of the actresses turned around and said, has anybody ever told you you sort of look like Barack Obama? You should. And I was like, who?
Right.
And they said, the guy who gave that speech at the Democratic National Convention. I was like, oh. I was like, okay, I could see that. And they were like, you should have your agent or manager send your headshot to Jimmy Kimmel and tell them that you look like him, because they do these political sketches all the time.
Right.
And they did. So I said, okay, good. And so I called my manager the next day and I said, will you send my picture to Jimmy Kimmel? She said, sure. And then literally maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, Caroline Liam, who was a casting director at the time,
right,
and who's now a friend of mine, Caroline Liam called and said, we're doing this sketch with Hillary and Obama sort of breakdancing on Hollywood Boulevard to win the vote, to win the Democratic vote. And we want you to do it. So I showed up and, had a really, I didn't even know what I did for my hair. I think I bought this wig, this really awful Afro wig, and cut it down short.
Right.
Anyway, and I did this sketch, and the woman who was Hillary, who really looks like Hillary, said, there's no other Obama guys out yet. You should do it. I don't know if you know, but there's a whole sort of like lookalike industry and da-da-da-da. And the people who do politicians, it's more, you don't just go to little kid parties. Like, you get hired by corporations to give, speeches and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that could be interesting. And so I did it. I went to this convention with her, and I met agents, and I started getting hired to do it. And then I had, for a while, and this was before the lookalike stuff happened, but for a while I'd had this idea of doing a musical parody about Obama, to the tune of Modern Major General, which a lot of people have done parodies of.
Yeah.
And so I said, maybe it's time to do this. And so I sat down and I wrote it, and I hired a bunch of friends. I hired a DP. I spent $5,000 of my own money, and then in those days you couldn't do it with an iPhone yet.
Right.
It wasn't further along. But I shot this thing and I threw it on YouTube, and it'd been on YouTube for like a day and a half. And somebody who wrote for the Huffington Post, which was really big at the time, reviewed it, and it just went wildfire. And it was on, Bill O'Reilly and CNN and all this kind of stuff. And it just went apeshit. And it was huge. And so that precipitated me doing a lot of corporate work as Obama, and then I was sitting in my living room, and my phone rang, and my agent said, hey. I was like, hey, what's up? He said, do you know who Norman Lear is? I was like, yeah, of course I
saw
know who
the
Norman
picture
Lear
of
is.
you with Norman Lear on your website.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And he said, and he got to that point. I said, yes, I know who he is. He said, well, and then my call waiting beeped. We still had call waiting then.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's like, you know what? Never mind. Just go ahead and take that call. And it was Norman calling me at my house. And he said he was Norman. And I was like, he said, hey, is this Ron Butler City? He said, this is Norman Lear. I was like, get the fuck out of here.
Right.
And we went back and forth like that until I was convinced. And then we spent 20 minutes talking on the phone. And I had the wherewithal to say, so Norman, when am I coming in to meet you? And he laughed and he said, here, I'll put my my right-hand man, Brent, on the phone, and you guys figure it out.
Yeah.
And so Brent and I figured it out, and I went in a couple weeks later and met with them, and it turned into sort of this ongoing collaboration. And I sometimes directed PSA spots for them. They called me in to do, readings of pilots for, that they were shopping around town for. I made another short film that they underwrote. It blossomed into this great relationship. And Brent and I are friends to this day. Brent, who produced Boots, which is on Netflix. Yeah. Brent Miller. So,
right. And I also think he was involved with the movie Before We Forget, the Juan Pablo de Pache movie from last year.
Absolutely. He's a lead executive producer on that. Yeah.
So did Norman Lear just like you and like that you did this, or did he?
He saw the Obama thing, and he was like,
fan. He just wanted to.
He was like, "This is fantastic. It's smart. Yeah. How on earth did you make it for $5,000?
Wow.
And let's do it." Because I did everything. I mean, I wrote the parody. I wrote all the lyrics. I hired the people. I hired my musical theater friends to go into a sound stage and record the lyrics, record the whole thing.
I think maybe I remember that, and I was putting it together as I was looking at you, and I was like, I think there's an Obama story here, but I just couldn't remember the specifics. Did it mean something to you to be him and what he represented?
Yeah, it meant it was interesting because people were like, "Oh, you should do stuff all the time, and you should pump out stuff every week." And I had people that wanted me to do TV commercials that were really sort of salacious and
right. No, you have
gross.
To protect. You're part of the brand in a way.
Yeah, and I there are other lookalikes and impersonators, but I felt that what I was doing, my own sort of sense of artistry, what I think is funny and what I think is interesting. The intersection, the Venn diagram, or the intersection of that with the brand of the president that I incredibly respected and wanted to support,
right,
was a very narrow. There was a very narrow space,
right,
a very narrow overlap there, and so I did what I thought would be funny and insightful and social commentary, and then stopped right there.
Right.
So yeah, that was sort of my approach. So I did a couple of really small things. And whenever I would go to corporate events, people would often want me to do stuff that I felt off color, and I just wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Right. No, because you were representing something that you believed in and a person. Did you ever meet him?
I never met him.
Yeah. All right. You still can. You still will.
I never met him.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it out there that Michelle Obama has this podcast.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that, like you, she hears about the Baldwin book and wants to interview me about it. So that's what I'm putting out to the universe.
Well, it would be such a funny interview to see her ask you things, and that's an interesting thing. That would be a great idea for them. All right. Tell people how they can learn more about you and anything other than the Baldwin book that we talked about that you want to get a mention in for. Go for it.
Oh, I'm on, I think the easiest thing to find me is on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but the stuff to sort of follow what I do sort of creatively and just goofiness and whatever is definitely Instagram, which is Ronnie Butler Jr., Ronnie Butler, RONNIE BUTLER JR for Junior.
Right.
That's on Instagram and on TikTok. And, that's the best way. That's the best way to hit me up. Or to find the stuff that I'm doing. My website is ronniebutler.com. So you saw that, and it's got a lot of stuff about me there. And I also do, and I don't know if we didn't talk about this, but I also I do life coaching. I do transformation coaching.
Yeah.
Specializing particularly in people like us who are in the arts or maybe moving into a different art form,
right,
or who are transitioning out of it, or but basically people that are in transition and sort of have blocks and want to get out of their own way. I do that kind of work as well, and that's also, you can just go to my website for that.
Very cool.
But I would say mostly Instagram and because I post everything I do about audiobooks. I post there, and the Baldwin book I'm so grateful that Nicholas chose me. I'm so grateful that he and Steve Wagner at Macmillan gave me the notes they gave me, because it has, this book has been what I call a career defining moment.
Right.
It has gotten so much, the audiobook, the book itself is just, has gotten on every single list, but the audiobook too has just done so well that it's really sort of marked a moment in time of me being, doing some of my best work. And I'm really proud of it. And I'm proud that I'm happy that people are enjoying it. And I really appreciate that you invited me on to talk to me today about that and all these other things.
Well, it's a pleasure. I've been seeing for years that you've been like killing it in this field, but this was the one where I was like, oh, this will be great to talk about. My final question, you mentioned earlier that doing this and being involved in this project changed you. In what ways?
Baldwin talks about how he believed himself to be ugly as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told he was ugly often.
By his father.
And he lived in a culture which said he was ugly because of the color of his skin. And all that notwithstanding, he grew to be a person who was completely and authentically himself as a black gay man in the 1950s, and then through on to be completely authentic and to evolve to a place where he loved himself, as he would say, warts and all, because he was not a perfect person, but loved himself, loved his own authentic self, and encouraged other people to do the same. And that, to me, is an incredible message, to get to the place where you look inward and outward at yourself and say, I love this, I love me, I love who I am, warts and all, and I'm willing to be this in the face of the world and believe and accept that I am still, and perhaps even more so, lovable and deserving. And that, I feel, is one of the incredible messages of his life that he didn't necessarily mean to say or mean to communicate, but does.
Yeah.
That's why.
Wow. What a beautiful note to end on. Ronnie, thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Dennis. It's good to see you again.
You as well. Maybe I have to make a trip to the desert. I have some other friends to see out there.
Come out here. We're an hour and a half away.
I know. It's not that far. This was a blast. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Ronnie Butler. You can learn more about him at his website, ronniebutler.com. All right, so this happened. Okay, I have some friends, good friends of mine for over 20 years, named Doug and John, and occasionally they will have movie nights at their place. And they invited some folks over to watch a Jamie Lee Curtis double feature from the 80s, Prom Night and Terror Train, two films that I hadn't seen before. But here's the deal. My friends Doug and John are probably going to be moving soon. It's not carved in stone when, but I think they're moving to Europe. And I know it's rough. I'm still processing it. And I think that these DVDs were something they don't plan to take with them. So they had folks over to watch Terror Train and Prom Night. So I'm not a huge horror movie fan. I don't not like them. I can watch them, and sometimes I really enjoy them, but I'm not like, I haven't seen every horror movie, and I love them and all of that. So first of all, Prom Night, here's the takeaway. Jamie Lee Curtis has a dance in the middle of that movie, a disco dance, that should be playing on a loop in gay bars everywhere. How did I miss the Prom Night dance? Because here's the thing. She's a trained dancer. You can tell in this disco number. Her partner is like the co-star in the movie, and he does a pretty good job. But Jamie Lee is tearing it up. It wouldn't surprise me if she did the movie solely so she could dance. She does double pirouettes, you guys. She is not like she's not like just some, kind of moves well person. She's a dancer, and she kills it. And the Prom Night dance she does the bump at one point. There's lots of disco heads. And that's the takeaway from Prom Night. So then we get to Terror Train. And Terror Train is a really good movie. Like somebody said, I might get this wrong, but they said that it was shot by Stanley Kubrick's cinematographer. So it looks really cool. Ben Johnson is the conductor on this train, and the plot is that this fraternity is going to have like a big last hurrah on this sort of train that's like you can book it like a custom train that's just your group. So it's not like they're on an Amtrak with Joe Biden. It's like a rental train, and there's some killing that happens. And and before the end of the movie, John would pause the video and say, who do you think did it? You know, and I got it right. Well, I was close. I was kind of like, something up with this person. So anyway, David Copperfield's in it as a magician. I have no idea when he was in the culture. I thought he was 90s, but apparently he's in Terror Train in like 81. So I don't know. And yeah, there's magic on the train, and there's magic to do, and an interesting story. And I was like, I'm into this movie. It was solid. That's enough for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for placement music. Catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.